Global Compact for Safe, Orderly and Regular Migration, aka some of the dumbest shit that I've read that's been signed by our Swedish government. Former government, I mean, of course, because they apparently are still allowed to sign stuff. You would think that people who are currently getting the hell out of office shouldn't be allowed to sign papers, but you'd be wrong, my friend. This used piece of toilet paper has been signed by Social Democrat and ex-Minister for Migration Helene Fritzon in Marrakesh in December this year, and it was done largely without any significant amount of media coverage. Kind of like when our EU membership got written into the Swedish constitution in 2010. People protested against it, and they still do, but it's not like a sneaky social democrat ever cared about the people's opinion. This is Sweden. Swedes don't protest. We pay into the welfare state and shut the fuck up. Right? That's usually how it goes. Well, for those of us who are insolent enough to give a rat's ass about what our nations have actually signed up for, I went through the trouble of doing something which our government, ex-government, should have done before signing, namely actually reading it. So the document starts off with a lot of very nice-sounding gibberish about how human rights are nice and pretty and how we all need to work together to be able to achieve safe, orderly, and regular migration. This regular and irregular migration terminology is Orwellian newspeak bullshit. It just means legal or illegal migration, but more about that later. The document is a complete swamp pit of vague phrasing and half-hearted euphemisms, so I've compiled the worst of it all, which I will be addressing in this video for your viewing pleasure. Sounds good? Okay, let's start. Early on you can read about how the UN wants to set up a centralized and national website in order to make information available to migrants which they might find to be useful. So, what's the harm in that, you might ask? Well, among the information which will be made accessible to migrants on this international webpage will be the country's available assistance which can be acquired. So-called basic assistance, we in Sweden know by now that it actually means healthcare and free dental care and many other things, all being paid for by the Swedish taxpayer. So the UN are basically telling countries who have signed up for this shit that they need to put up a website so that migrants from all over the world can go nation shopping. They can compare benefits between different countries. And guess who gives some of the most generous basic assistance in Europe? Yeah. We are also expected to incorporate healthcare policies and plans which facilitate affordable and non-discriminatory access, hire interpreters, and train healthcare providers on culturally sensitive service delivery. Okay, so already here I would refuse to sign this document. It's pure idiocy. What does culturally sensitive service delivery mean? I mean, it's a bullshit word. What is that? That's like Islamophobia. Culturally sensitive. Either you accept the culture of the nation which takes you in, or you don't, and you should leave. I don't understand what culturally sensitive is. That's a bullshit term. All of this nonsense about culture is a common theme which this entire document is coated in. This view that the need of the migrant always trumps the need of the host nation's citizen. Seriously, nowhere is there anything written about the sacrifices that will be expected from the citizens who suddenly has his or her homeland flooded by migrants from all over the world. There's nothing. Fucking sip. Despite flooding healthcare waiting lines, school classes, and the job market, not a single sentence is dedicated to show any form of understanding for how mass migration afflicts the native population. There's nothing. But it gets worse. This document also makes it extremely clear that if followed, there would cease to be any differentiating line between legal and illegal migrant. Meaning that if you enter a country illegally, or irregularly, as the UN calls it, you will still be expected to be given the same benefits and have all of the same rights as in law-abiding migrants. So the nation's rule of law basically goes out the window. All while the UN in this document maintains a straight face, fervently assuring us that we'll have no problem with maintaining our nation's sovereignty and the control of our borders. Right. Still want to sign this shit? Here is some more stupidity I found while reading this. Everything in this entire migration pact is written by some people who are either willfully ignorant in the hopes of preventing future negative ramifications, or are severely misinformed about who the primary group of migrants actually are. Namely, men, not women or children. Because we know through research that's been compiled by Pew Research Center that 73% of all international migrants are men, usually traveling alone. This is completely ignored in the document, and instead young children and women are presented as being your typical migrants, which is just a blatant lie. These are the migrant men who also have a really bad habit of lying about their age and their country of origin, which is a problem that the UN fails to address or to offer any solution for. Moving on. Point 9 and 10 here in the Migration Pact are the only 2 points that are actually somewhat reasonable. They are just about making it more difficult for traffickers to smuggle people into Europe. I don't have a problem with that, and it's a couple of good suggestions here, so yeah. Upon reading the UN's ideas about screening migrants, I just laughed at the whole thing. It's the same shit that we're seeing all over Europe already. Human waste comes into different European countries, rapes or kills some poor bastard, and then gets cuddled and protected against justice in his homeland by, instead of deportation, the criminal is allowed to stay in Europe. The UN offers nothing in order to fix this. They just keep going on about this soft-on-crime naive bullshit that we're already using right now that isn't working. Not all migrants are criminals, of course, but only criminal migrants benefit from this type of ridiculous screening. The Migration Pact also demands from the nations signing it that they provide a floor when it comes to the migrants' opportunity to collect a pension. All migrants are, according to this document, allowed to get a pension despite never having worked a day in the nation to which they migrate. How the hell this is going to be paid for in a country such as Sweden, with our already strained pension system and our growing number of elderly people who are homeless because of it, conveniently isn't specified by the UN. And here's some more shit. In one part of the document there are 2 points about how UN member states should treat critics of migration. The first point is about how to best teach migrants who to contact if they get triggered by a native citizen saying something that they don't like. They first write only about violence, but they later rephrase it and simply call it hate crimes. Hate crime is a term that today in Europe is completely ruined, and it encompasses what is also called hate speech, and hate speech in Europe is basically free speech. Now the second part of this point in the document is about how news media should act regarding their reporting on migration. Media professionals are instructed to conduct objective quality reporting of media outlets and are told that they need to be sensitized and educated on migration-related issues and the correct terminology, and invest in ethical reporting standards in advertising. I've actually never heard that word before, sensitized. I had to check what the hell that means. But here comes the most interesting / terrible part. In the text, the UN member states are told to stop the allocation of public funding or material support to media outlets that systemically promote intolerance, xenophobia, racism, and other forms of discrimination towards migrants. They then, in an effort to seem fair, conclude by writing that all of these demands should be carried out while still having full respect for the freedom of the media. Right. Good luck with that. This is just unapologetic censorship by using the withdrawal of public funding as a threat, because any criticism against the UN migration policies will, according to this signed document, be labeled as hate speech and thereby a crime. I could go on, but to summarize, this document is in its entirety so incredibly vague, stupid, and poorly written that it's all rather embarrassing. And I am not the only one to have noticed this. Representatives for the United States, a country who refused to sign this migration pact, they also noticed that this is complete garbage. Here's what they had to say about the document describing the UN's migration pact. I quote, "The United States is concerned that compact supporters, recognizing the lack of widespread support for a legally binding international migration convention, seek to use the compact and its outcomes and objectives as long-term means of building customary international law or so-called soft law in the area of migration. The United States is particularly concerned by the novel use of the term compact to describe the document. Unlike standard titles for international instruments, compact has no settled meaning in international law, but it implies legal obligation. Hence, the compact is amenable to claims that its commitments are legal obligations, or at least evidence of international consensus on universal legal principles. The United States objects to any such claims and holds that neither the compact nor any commitments by states to implement its objectives create any legal obligations on UN member states or create new rights or protections for foreign nationals as a matter of conventional or customary international law." They continue by writing, The United States is also concerned that the compact doesn't sufficiently address the large number of foreign nationals who reside illegally in many states. In many countries, citizens, including those who themselves immigrated from other countries, are concerned about this phenomenon, and it undercuts their faith in the ability of their government to faithfully execute their laws. The presence of a large number of illegal migrants thus undermines the rule of law. In democratic nations where governments are responsive and accountable to the people, it also hurts the ability of states to consider implementing new forms of legal immigration. End of quote. This is just a few of the points that the US criticizes with this migration pact, but they are both very severe. The last part about not addressing foreign nationals residing illegally in a country is 100% correct, since in the document, the UN explicitly writes that there should be no difference between a person's migration status when it comes to receiving healthcare benefits and other types of assistance. So you can be illegally in a country or legally, it doesn't matter according to the UN. The US representatives also correctly points out that in practice would mean that you'd completely hollow out any respect for the rule of law, since lawlessness would be normalized when it comes to migrants. And here, the US really hits right on target about something I've been wondering about during this entire time I've been reading this document, and reading about all of the assistance and the benefits and the personnel which will be spent caring for migrants, and that is the cost. I quote, "The United States is also concerned that the compact intentionally downplays the cost of immigration to destination countries by failing to account for legitimate concerns and debates related to national security, the loss of employment opportunities, especially for lower skilled and more vulnerable citizens, declining social trust, and stresses on public services. As President Trump said in his September 2017 address to the General Assembly, for receiving countries, the substantial cost of uncontrolled migration are borne overwhelmingly by low-income citizens whose concerns are most often ignored by both media and the government." End of quote. Exactly, I couldn't agree more. While reading this document, I could see already at first glance that all of these obligations to which nation-states would be agreeing to are going to massively strain these nations' economies. In this migration pact, the UN are writing about the need to develop new systems for smooth migration by building new departments, sub-departments, digital systems, and new methods to use for data transfer, all while providing care for and processing hundreds of thousands of people. And all of this is apparently supposed to be paid for in the coming years as we all enter a new recession. It's crazy. And the US have realized this. President Donald J. Trump has realized that this migration pact is fucking insane. The US representatives end by writing, I quote, "In sum, the compact strikes the wrong balance. Its pro-migration stance fails to recognize that well-managed legal immigration must start and end with effective national controls over borders. It lists many desirable outcomes but fails to acknowledge that the effective security of states' borders must precede all other objectives. This undermines its credibility as an effective roadmap for addressing the migration challenges all states face." Well, bravo, I couldn't have said it better myself. The defense that we've been hearing about how this UN migration pact is non-binding legally is of course also a lie. This lie has been said for several months, all while one nation after another were handed and signed nation-specific petitions, but it's all false. It has been verified by Germany's ex-chancellor Angela Merkel that the migration pact is indeed legally binding. She admitted this first after having been confronted by a member from Alternative for Deutschland. And that despite countries like Hungary, Poland, and as I mentioned earlier, the US, refusing to sign. All UN member states are, according to Merkel, expected to obey the rules set by this new pact. So we Europeans, and especially Eastern Europeans, are now not only being pushed around by the EU, but also by the UN. But the French, at least, are having a sound reaction to this, and 4 high-ranking generals have accused Macron for treason for signing the migration pact over the heads of the French people. But the only political party in Sweden to protest against signing this train wreck were the Sweden Democrats, who wanted to have a debate about it. A request which was later denied by the floor leader at our parliament after consultation with the other group leaders for our other political parties. You'd think that they'd want to spend a little bit more time reading a migration pact before signing it into practice by someone as weak as a transitional government, but apparently they all just had faith in the Social Democrats' decision. All of you living throughout Europe, talk to your representatives about this migration pact, because it will severely hurt your nation's sovereignty and your right to freedom of speech and your way of life. This is very important, even if your country has already signed this, which I know that a lot of countries have. Protest anyway. Do it loudly. This is complete garbage. It's insane. Do not sign this. Anyway, thank you for listening. Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. We'll talk again in 2019. Take care.
How low can you get giving Kris Kringle a parking ticket at Christmas Eve?
Everyone in this family hates me.
Then maybe you should ask Santa for a new family.
Elf fucker! Turn around, elf fucker! Who's the bitch?